G'day and welcome back to another episode of the Rise and Form podcast. The podcast that has real talk about forming your character with actually useful psychology.
We're an unlikely duo of an American psychologist and an Aussie psychologist who both love theology and the science of change.
So grab a chair and a hot cup of coffee and open your heart and mind to the conversation.
Please follow us on Instagram and Spotify or Apple. That way you can find us easy and know when we post our next episode.
Now on to the show.
Hey, we're glad you guys are back with us. It's Andrea without Abe again because he's still gone. Like, what's going on? How did he get so many vacation days? I didn't get the memo. Anyways, I just wanted to come on here to introduce you guys to our guest, Brandon Reynolds. Brandon is the founder of an organization called Into the Deep, which is a men's discipleship group. When we speak with Brandon, you can really tell that he has a passion for building healthy men's community and that this is a mission that comes straight from God. And he'll tell us a little bit about that during the podcast. He was really struck by the question, what would it look like to disciple a guy for a year and take him into the deeper waters of his faith? And that began this whole journey for him that led to really building meaningful community. And in this, he has proven methods to help build community for men. And I will say the methods work because I can see transformation in my husband. Another fact, and I believe he mentioned this in the episode, he has pastoral background as well. And a fun fact is that this is Brandon's first podcast, and he did a great job. We had so much fun with him. So without further ado, let's get into it.
You know, we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit today. Chatting with you the other day, Brandon, we loved that you said love. And I was like, let's go with that. And so, you know, we're combining like a formative moment in your life with a time that the fruit of the Spirit moved you to love someone in some way, or you were moved by someone loving you in some way. So if we can...
Yeah, I think love is definitely one of those things we all want to do better at. I don't think anybody wakes up any day and is like, I'm just Captain Awesome at loving everything and everybody. Like me and God, I love him so good, you know, and my wife, my kids, my coworkers, traffic. Like I'm just crushing loving well, you know. It's so, you know, I think for me, there was a moment years ago when God really moved me to actually love and care for men in a whole new way. There's a paradigm shift. And at the time, our church was putting on the Justice Conference, which was in Portland, Oregon at the Convention Center. And it was really cool, really powerful message, powerful theme. And at the conference, what one does is you just bring a bunch of nonprofits and they rent out space. And we had hundreds of vendors showing up with awesome missions, you know, clean water, Bible literacy, calling young women out of sex trafficking. It was just a real awesome booth after booth, aisle after aisle. And I remember just being a part of the team that kind of set that up. And I remember walking up and down those aisles and it just hit me like these are all kind of man problems. This is man out there causing sin. And you don't really see a lot of women running around causing chaos. And so all of these nonprofits exist to help deal with the sin of man.
Oh, man.
And so at that moment, God really broke my heart to equip men, to help men, to resource men, to at Into the Deep, to call men out of isolation into a Christ-centered community. Because I think that's where most guys, they don't really know how to love well. They don't really maybe know what does it look like to receive God's love and grace and then to love and lead well out in and through that. And so after that, kind of God spoke to me. He was just continuing to love me and faithfully calling me to encourage others. So whether that's through cultivating men's communities, working with churches or conferences or whatever it is. It's just this deep burden to help men fully receive God's love and then kind of be a conduit
Wow.
of it and kind of move forward in their own faith and life with love.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and I just think a lot of
Yeah.
guys, that's not really modeled to them. It's not really shown. They don't really know where to go. You know, we kind of know where to go when life hits the fan. You know, when
Yeah.
we hit rock bottom, there's definitely resources out there. We get caught, you know, you get arrested, you know, there's definitely consequences where you're told where to go. But we, you know, Into the Deep was birthed out of this idea of how do we consistently create a culture for men to step into. And so that's what I get to do every day in response to God, kind of revealing a new mindset, to create spaces and places for men to consistently show up
that's good.
and be engaged.
You know, as you were saying, kind of God broke your heart for men in a way, like you sort of noticed, and I can see that moment, and thank you for even saying that, because I don't know, I think that thought sometimes as well. Just I'm like, yeah, like I hate that my sex is like responsible for just so much destruction on planet Earth, and you know, and I know there's always like complexities to that, and it's a relationship between probably a lot of different things, but so just to hear like, yeah, be a part of the solution, let's work on that. And so I'm wondering like what that, even in just digging in, like what God was talking to you about, or what kind of like, what really hit you. Was that an emotion? Was that the Holy Spirit? Like when your heart was broken in that way, because you've done a lot since then. So I'm guessing that was a very formative moment for you.
Yeah, it was. God kind of gave me this vision of a father taking his son out to lunch. And it's, you know, kind of cinematography. It looked really cool, you know, like, oh, good for that dad. But the dad kind of sat there across the table awkwardly with his son. And the son was kind of like, what are we doing here? And then kind of in this vision, the son pulls out kind of his phone. And the dad's like defeated, like, I can't compete with that. So the dad just kind of pulls out his phone, and the food comes and goes and pays, and they leave. And it was just, again, my heart was just stirred for this dad who just he wants to do the right thing. He's just not equipped on what to do. It's so, taking that heartbreak and that burden to equip men. I was pastoring at a church at the time in Bend, and luckily I was able to just start building men's community. Just started with a men's study, and we started writing curriculum, and like I said, consistently calling men to just show up and have conversations about faith and life and scripture, and just creating a space for guys to show up and say, I think I'm going to get fired tomorrow, or I don't know how to raise my son, or and so really becoming not like a resource where more information is given, but like a space where guys can show up. And I just think for a lot of men, we kind of lose the art of teammates in like middle school sports. I feel like for me, like middle school sports was the last time a bunch of, you know, guys were forced together and like, you're on this team and we've got coaching and just, we're going to go out and play this team. And you kind of had that like camaraderie and that like, we're in this together, and you don't have to be perfect and I'm not perfect, but let's just come together. And I think so, as we've been building men's communities, I think that's been kind of what's kind of come from it. For us, isn't trying to resource every guy with, you know, 7 steps to being more awesome, but more, here's a space where you can come and have a conversation, and you're known, you belong, you matter. And let's just talk about what's really happening in your world. And let's not try to solve all the world problems or all the politics. Let's just focus on our relationship with God and what's he calling and stirring us to. And so, that was kind of, I think, you know, the calling, but then also a little bit more clarity on, you know, this idea of man coming out of isolation and into a Christ-centered community. And, you know, Into the Deep, kind of where we got the name, is We just see in Luke chapter 5, when Jesus rolls up on Simon Peter, he preaches and then he says, get into the boat. And then Jesus says, push out into the deep. And it's there in the deep where Jesus really takes Simon Peter's career and shifts it. Yeah, it's the master showing up saying like, let's actually go fish here. And what's cool is, kind of like Jesus, God does, he shows up, he does something big in our life, but then Jesus calls him into community. He calls him into discipleship. He says, hey, come with me for 3 years and let's do something a little bit more than catch some fish. And that's the culture we're trying to create. And Into the Deep is where a guy can jump on our discipleship pathway and go with us and be on mission and see our faith as adventurous, see our marriage as fun, see parenting. If you have kids, see parenting as a fun journey to be a part of. It's all adventurous rather than, I think for a lot of guys who are like, I don't know, I'm just trying to do a little bit better than my dad. And if I'm doing a little bit better than my dad, I'm winning. And if that's the bar, I'm doing just fine. And kind of believing that lie of isolation. So it's a little bit more in depth kind of.
Wow. I can really, sorry. I could really see where God, like, when you talk about like tugging on your heart and this compassion that he gave you from this image, from all of that, to really see, the need, the deep need that's there. And what I love is that you're focusing on, like, I think sometimes we can get so overwhelmed and like, there's just so many areas where we can start. And you're like, look, what the problem that you saw that God revealed to you was lack of community. And that's where you're focusing in on. That's like, if we can give men community, and men being, especially within the Christian faith, especially how God designed it, being kind of the, they're the core of the family. They're where everything starts. So if we can resource them and give them the community they need to then be able to flourish, help in flourishing. We talked about that in another episode. We could hit so many areas. So this is phenomenal. And I'll say, I know personally, because Carrie, my husband, is a part of the Into the Deep, community groups. And I've seen a change in him from being amongst other men. I've seen him like be able to encourage other men in turn. And I know he's been very encouraged by you, Brandon. I know he trusts you a lot. And that's really why we had thought about like reaching out to you just off of the testimony of what Carrie shared about you.
I really appreciate that. And I think trust is that huge word. I think most guys, when they lose trust in something or someone, it's hard to get back, and so earning trust. And we just believe discipleship moves at the speed of relationship. And so how do we build meaningful relationships with guys and let guys, kind of see it, like I said, their faith as adventurous. And then what's God calling me to do? Because most men are lead teaching pastors. And if that's our only example, then we're kind of like, I guess I'm not pastor. So what am I? And I think scripturally, there's so much more to our identity as men. And again, just making sure guys have that right bar that's set. And you don't have to quit your day job and start a nonprofit or start a church to feel like you're responding to the adventurous call of your faith. It's just show up and build community and pour into the guys that you have already a wake of influence with and call them to what God's stirring in your heart too. And so I think there's just a lot out there for guys to sift through in their faith and not do it alone.
It's so true. I mean, that idea of space, like I was thinking, as soon as you said a space where guys can just meet, I was like, that's the pub, right? But like, and also the golf course and those sorts of places, right? Which is like, fine, like those things are good. But even the research on when you put a group of men together or humans together that don't have clear direction and don't have a positive influence, it gets more toxic. It doesn't. We don't get better. Right. And so just having a space where there's intentionality to not be toxic, right? To be positive. The Holy Spirit.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And every time we gather, we're always thinking, how do we better a man? How do we resource him to go home or to go back to work or wherever his next is
Yeah.
to feel equipped, right? And we're always trying to identify what we kind of call the three I's, the identity, idolatry, and isolation. And so how do we help men fight in that tension of just knowing their true identity? As the first curriculum we ever wrote was called I Am Called. And it's just, as God looks down at us, what does he call us? Biblically, he calls us, son. He calls us forgiven. He calls us these attributes that a lot of guys don't live in. And, so getting our identity right. And then idolatry is just, hey, your work is not the number one focus. Actually, your kids shouldn't be the number one focus. Your relationship with God should be the number one. If he's not on the throne of your life, then everything's going to crumble. And so, identity, idolatry, and then, as I said earlier, isolation. And so when guys show up, we want to make sure we're equipping them in that way. So they go out, they go home, better equipped. And it's really, the end of the day, it's just they're walking more humbly with God.
Yeah.
Because I think that's such a huge struggle for men, is to like, how do I humbly walk with God in my lifestyle? It's a big mind shift for, I think, a lot of guys.
Yeah. I hear so much love, even in how you want to how you are resourcing men, from like just these areas of need, and like, how can we pour into them, and love them well, so that way they can, like you said, spread that on to others. So I guess I want to throw out to you, like, what is love to you? And maybe what have you personally had to learn or unlearn to like kind of understand it in a deeper way?
Just a nice light question.
Yeah.
Love. I think so my wife and I have 4 kids. We've got 3 daughters and a son, and our oldest 3 they're out of the house, and 2 married, 1 in college. And so we're left with our 16-year-old son, and he's awesome, but there's so much he has to learn. And it's funny because I'll tell him something, and then like 30 seconds later, I'm like, oh, I should take my own advice. That was really good. And so anyway, so my son's he's a football player in high school, and like any person, he's just at that age, like, do I like this or do I love this? Do I like this sport? Do I love this sport? And that like and love. And so the other day I took him out for coffee, and I just said, like, hey, do you love football or you just like it? It's like, I actually love it. I love football. And so then my next statement was, and this is kind of my definition right now of love. It's like, well, you sacrifice for the things you love. And I think for him, the hope was like, I got to sacrifice sleep. I got to eat better. I got to work out, like all the things a high school 16-year-old wants to do. And then there's this football thing, or whatever it is, whatever your kid or anybody's thing is. And so just to watch him the last couple of weeks just make sacrifices for this sport, which it's a sport, it'll come and go, but it's just a good model for all of us. And so I think of my own, my relationship with God. Like, am I making sacrifices because I claim I love God? In my marriage, am I making sacrifices because I claim I love my wife, my kids, my friends, whatever it is? And I just think, so for me in this season, my definition of love is it's sacrificial. And I think we see that in Jesus. I think, recently at our church on Sunday, pastor was just talking about, like, Jesus set a great example. He just sacrificed and loved really well. And it's hard to argue. It's hard to debate with someone when they kind of are like out loving you, and I was just like, that's so true. Like Jesus he really loved well.
Yeah.
And I just think, man, there's so much to that.
So much
that we
to
want to be a part of.
So much to that. Like, we did this marriage course a while ago called Re-Engage. And one of the main principles of it is recognize your inability to love, which is like chapter 2 of the course or something. And we really had to sit with that, for a moment. And it asks you to think about, so where did you learn to love? And I was like, I've got an image of, and I don't want to knock my father, but obviously that's where I learned to love. And you know, I know that he did sacrificial things and all of that, but when I look at him and mum, this is in the context of marriage, he would be on the couch with a remote control in his hand, and that's where I learned what love was. And so I was sort of looking at myself and I was like, how did I even think that I'd be good at loving my wife? Like, how on earth, where did I develop that idea from? You know, where I haven't actually learned what love is. And I love what you just said, because the first thing that love is, it's not a feeling necessarily, right? That's an emotion that comes and goes, but it's a sacrifice. Like, love is giving. Love gives patience, or love gives forgiveness, or love gives, you know, of self to other. And how Jesus was so good at that. And I don't know, I was like, how do we like get everyone to understand that love's hard. Like, loving someone is hard because we are so egocentric. Yeah. And like, man, yeah, even God, you know, it's like, God, I just want to love you, but it's not going to be just this emotional thing sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's such a tension in that for men, who kind of struggle with that side of our faith, to love God, to, you know, the worship songs sometimes, or, you know, lovey. And I think, you know, here, like, love God, and in Ephesians 5, it talks about love and respect. And that's what I'm terrible at loving my wife, but I'm great at respecting her, you know, but that's not what she needs, right? She needs love, and I need respect. And so I did a wedding recently, and that's just one of my taglines in weddings that I do. And it's so true. It's just like, the wife needs the love of her husband, but men don't really do love well. You know, and then the wife wants, the wife wants the love of the husband wants the respect of the wife. And that cycle can just be really crushing for guys who are like, I told her I love her, you know, once a month. Like, I'll let her know if anything changes, you know, kind of like this idea,
man.
But we want to be respected, but and I think that part is like, you know, doing to others as you'd have them do unto you. It's really good, but it's hard in marriage, because, and I think that's the attention too, for guys. So I've tried to make a habit to surround myself with guys who really do that well, who love their wife well, in all the ways my wife tells me I could do better. And I try to surround myself with those guys and be like, hey, what does your date night look like? You know, what are you doing, you know, to show love to your wife? Because it's just, for me, it's a tough one.
I think that's good, you know, bringing in that piece of sacrifice, but also respect, that these are facets of like love. These are all different facets. And, you know, God designed us in ways to be able to, you know, I mean, love is so deep, and like, it's like you said, it's not easy. And I can't remember, maybe it was First Corinthians that I was reading or something, where just really reflecting on it. Yeah, First Corinthians 13, where just talking about like all the things love is. And like, if you really sit and read that, it's like, fail. It's
impossible.
I do it in my own strength. I fail in that, you know, but in the Spirit, as the Spirit guides me, I can do it. But I can only do these things in the Spirit. I can only sacrifice in the Spirit. Like, that's a tough one, because it's like, it's not the warm and fuzzies, you know, feeling.
Right. Yeah. They lived happily ever after. Like, it doesn't work unless, you know, they realize, like, I can't do this on my own. I need God's Spirit. I need Jesus as example. I need God's, you know, promise for my life, to really lean into that and be committed to it, because it's a commitment. It's a choice.
And knowing even just that, like you've been saying, how loved we are by God in our mess. Like, even just knowing, and I think we all like go on this journey of maturity, of recognizing just how hard it is to love us, like how hard I am to love. And the fact, and that's part of it, but then also knowing that God, like, my sin, my shame separates me from God, and that the weight of that sin is immense. Like, the weight of that sin it's so immense, and He loves me anyway, and He loves me through that. And I think like recognizing that across life is like, and we talked about this on the podcast last week, which is we talked about, I think it was last week, forbearance or patience. Love is patient, and the idea that God, he bore our sin. He bears with us. He can bear Abe.
Yeah.
He can bear me. He's got the patience to bear me. I know Andre's like, God must love, he's a loving guy. she's like, Abe's hard to bear.
Yeah.
And then applying that to your friends, applying that to your neighbor, applying that to your kids, you know, like I had to really like, actually just at work doing this, it's just been helping me rise and form, because I was bearing with my kid over the weekend. I was like, love is patient. I've got to bear you today. And he was being a lot, and you know, it just helped me bear him that way. You know, and
well, I think too that mindset for us as Christians, there's like, okay, I can bear this because one day I'll be on the other side of eternity. You know, and I think my brother and his wife, they're a couple years older than us, and they talk a lot about when they're old and in their 80s and 90s on the rocking chair in their porch. And like, gosh, they're already thinking long term, like that's their eternity, you know, kind of like, and I just think that mindset really helps us get through, like you said, seasons of our life, parenting, tough patches in marriage. If we have this perspective of, I'm going to grow old with this woman, you know, like that rocking chair, that's gonna happen. So that's going to help me, you know, maybe apply better love and respect now, as I have that mindset of we're still going to be together in 30 years, 20 years. Like if you know, if you have your parent, as a parent, you're like, we got these 4 kids. We're going to be in their lives hopefully a long time. So it's a long journey. And I think that kind of helps sometimes calm the highs and lows maybe of marriage or just friendship, like you said, community,
that perspective.
Church.
You know, as all relationships do, I know Carrie and I went through like a tough point, and it felt like if I was just thinking about that season, it felt like this is lasting forever. It felt like it did last a few years, where it just felt like we were very disconnected. And we're on the other side of that now. We're a lot better now. And so I know it's hard in the midst of it to be like, this is just a part of it. This isn't, let me draw this out in the long term, so that way it gives me some endurance. Like this, I only got to run this for a little bit. But it is so helpful to, if we can get to that, if we can pause enough to just say like, I know this feels like forever, but this is a portion of a longer story.
Man.
Yes.
You know?
Just real quick on that. Yeah. My wife and I our grandparents, our oldest daughter and her husband have a
Brandon
10-year-old
looks
right
about
now,
25, by the way,
just-
everyone.
it-
So
I know,
it's
I
like, I'm
know,
sitting here going, what the heck?
I was thrown away when you said you had.
Well, when you get married young and you have kids young, and your kids get married young and have kids young,
There you go.
you can do that. Yeah. But it just when our granddaughter Alice is over and she cries and is fussy about whatever, like as a grandparent, I'm like, oh, that's so cute. Like it's just a fun season. Like you were saying, like this is, you know, but her parents, you know, our daughter and her husband, they're just like, you know, and I just have a journey that's a little bit longer, and I'm like, oh, that's so precious. She's throwing food. Oh, you know, like, you know, oh, wait till you have to pay for car insurance. You know, that kind of you know, season of life. You know, it's just that perspective of this too shall pass, but let's enjoy this season.
Both sides of that. Both sides
again.
of that. I know it's a hard thing, isn't it, to connect with, because when you're in the hard times, and Andrea, as you were saying that, I started like sinking, because I was like, oh my gosh, I have so been there. Like we were there for quite a while as well. And I'm so glad to say we've come through that. You know, we had to put some hard yards in. We had to work some stuff out, right? And, and it did feel like in that moment, the sky's falling in. And we are going to be here. I don't know if we're ever going to get better. And I could guarantee people that listen to this, they'll be like, if they're in it, they're like, you guys are telling me that somehow like the clouds pass and the sun shines again at some point. And it's like, it does. It really does. But it definitely is hard to believe that when you're in it. Thanks for listening to the show, everyone. Make sure you like us on Instagram. No, you don't like us on Instagram. Everyone, you know what we're saying.
You should like us on Instagram and follow us.
Follow us on Instagram.
You should go above and beyond.
yeah, follow us on Spotify or Apple and tell your
Share our
friends.
content.